The boardroom was designed for power. 40 floors above Manhattan, glass walls revealed a city that bowed to wealth. Screens lined the far wall. Investors tuned in, virtually. Legal counsel stood alert. The press had been invited, under the pretense of a historic merger announcement. At the head of the table stood Alexander Laurent, billionaire tech CEO, polished, controlled, admired. He was used to being the most powerful man in any room. Today, that certainty fractured. Cameras flashed as a board member cleared his throat. Before we proceed with the acquisition vote, the chairman announced, voice carefully measured, there is a matter that requires public clarification. Alexander's jaw tightened slightly. He did not like surprises. The double doors opened, and she walked in. Natalie Reed, not in designer silk, not in borrowed elegance. She wore a tailored navy suit, simple heels, and the kind of calm that comes from surviving storms without applause. Beside her, 2 boys, identical, 6 years old, curly dark hair, steel blue eyes, the same sharp cheekbones that financial magazines had once described as the face of corporate dominance. The room shifted, murmurs, phones lifted, Zoom screens flickered with stunned expressions. One investor whispered, "That's impossible." Another leaned forward, studying the children more closely. The resemblance was not subtle. Alexander's breath stalled for half a second, barely noticeable to anyone but Natalie. She saw it, the recognition, the math clicking into place, the memory of one night he had filed away as meaningless. She thought it was just one night. The chairman continued, carefully, "Mr. Laurent, is it true that these children are biologically yours?" The question hung heavy, not whispered, not hidden, broadcast live. The financial press moved closer. Alexander didn't blink. His eyes shifted to Natalie. Not soft, not tender, assessing, is this some kind of setup? One board member demanded. Natalie's chin lifted slightly. "I didn't come here for money," she said, voice steady. "I came because your legal team served me papers this morning accusing me of attempting to extort your CEO. Gasps rippled. Alexander's attorney stiffened. The accusation had been meant to silence her quietly, a private pressure tactic. Instead, it detonated publicly. "Are you saying," a reporter shouted, "that Mr. Laurent knew about the twins?" Natalie didn't hesitate. "He knew I was pregnant." Every lens in the room swung back to Alexander. "Have you ever made one decision that followed you for years?" Alexander's mind flashed backward. A charity gala, a delayed driver, rain against the windows, one unguarded conversation. One night, when the billionaire stopped being careful, he had sent her away with a transfer, not cruel, not tender, efficient, no promises, no follow-up. And now, 2 children stood inside his empire. "Ms. Reed," the chairman pressed, "are you claiming Mr. Laurent abandoned you?" Natalie inhaled. "I'm saying he chose his reputation over responsibility." A low wave of murmurs rolled across the boardroom. Power dynamics shifted in real time. White billionaire, CEO. Black woman from South Side Chicago, single mother. Former contracted driver for his company fleet. Everyone in that room understood the imbalance. Everyone in that room had, at some point, underestimated someone who didn't fit the profile of power. The media smelled blood. "Did you trap him?" A reporter blurted recklessly. "Was this planned? Are you seeking a settlement?" Natalie's expression didn't crack. "I raised them alone," she replied. "I worked double shifts. I turned down interviews. I stayed quiet while he built an empire that could fund 10 generations." She looked directly at Alexander. "I didn't need his money. I needed him to acknowledge them." The twins shifted nervously beside her, holding hands. The older one, by mere minutes, looked up at Alexander and asked softly, "Are you our dad?" The question landed harder than any shareholder vote. Alexander felt the entire room watching for weakness. Markets reacted in seconds. Phones buzzed across the table. Stock alerts, social media trends. "The Laurent twins, a billionaire scandal." The chairman whispered urgently, "We need to recess." But it was too late. The chaos had begun. One board member leaned toward Alexander. "If this is true, The merger collapses. Another hissed. The family values investors will pull out. Natalie didn't move. She had already endured the hardest years. What happens when a billionaire disappears and leaves you with twins? You learn strength without applause. You master dignity without defense. You stop waiting to be chosen. Alexander finally stood, slowly, controlled. The room quieted instinctively. His voice, when it came, was even, "You bring children into a corporate negotiation?" Natalie met his gaze without flinching. "You brought lawyers into motherhood." The hit was precise. Investors shifted uncomfortably. Because beneath the scandal was a truth no one liked confronting. Power protects itself. Unless someone refuses to stay invisible. A shareholder muttered, "This looks terrible." Another whispered, "DNA test." The chairman nodded sharply. "We will require confirmation." Natalie opened her bag calmly and slid a sealed envelope across the table. "Already done." The legal team opened it. Silence. The attorney's face strained slightly. He passed the report to the chairman, who passed it to Alexander. 99.97% probability. The boys were his. No ambiguity, no escape. Cameras zoomed in. Alexander's empire had been built on certainty, on control, on strategic risk. But no algorithm prepares you for a child looking at you with your own eyes. The younger twin tugged Natalie's sleeve. "Mom, are we in trouble?" The room fractured emotionally. Investors saw liability. Media saw scandal. Board members saw instability. But for the first time, Alexander saw consequences. And still, he hadn't spoken the words everyone waited for. Instead, one director leaned forward sharply. "This is clearly an attempt to leverage public sympathy," he snapped. "Ms. Reed, you had 6 years to come forward." Natalie's gaze hardened. "I tried privately. Your CEO's office blocked every call." All eyes returned to Alexander. "Have you ever made one decision that followed you for years? One decision made from ego, from fear, from pride?" Now that decision stood beside him wearing small navy blazers and confusion in their eyes. The chairman whispered urgently, "Alexander, you must respond." The media pressed closer. Natalie stood tall, even as whispers swirled about her motives, her timing, her character. Everyone has felt invisible at some point, overlooked, dismissed, assumed to be opportunistic when they were simply asking to be seen. The stock ticker continued sliding downward. Alexander understood numbers. He understood leverage. He understood power. But in this moment, he didn't control the narrative. Natalie did, and the world watched to see whether the billionaire would protect his image or claim his blood. If you believe one decision can change everything, type "one night" in the comments. Silence held the room hostage. Not the polite kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that determines legacies. Alexander Laurent had spent 15 years mastering silence. In negotiations, silence made competitors uncomfortable. In boardrooms, silence created authority. In interviews, silence suggested depth. But this silence? This one demanded a decision. Across from him stood Natalie. No trembling hands, no pleading, no performance, just truth. And 2 boys who had inherited his eyes. The chairman leaned closer. "Alexander," he whispered urgently, "anything you say right now will move markets. Markets, valuations, acquisitions, reputation, those had always come first." Alexander slowly turned toward the twins. The older one stared back with cautious curiosity. The younger one hid partially behind Natalie's arm. He saw it now. The slight dimple on the left cheek, the posture, even the way they held tension in their shoulders. Not coincidence. Not strategy. His sons. Reporters lifted their microphones higher. A financial correspondent spoke quickly into her earpiece. "We are witnessing a live paternity confirmation involving billionaire CEO Alexander Laurent." A board member muttered under his breath, "Deny. Control. Defer to legal." That would be the safe move. That would be the strategic move. But safe decisions had brought him here. Have you ever made one decision that followed you for years? Alexander stepped away from the head of the table. A subtle act, but symbolic. He was no longer standing as CEO. He was standing as a man. The chairman hissed quietly, "What are you doing?" Alexander didn't answer him. Instead, he addressed Natalie. "You should have told me." Her expression sharpened, not defensive, but steady. "I did." The room tightened again. He remembered now. The voicemail he never returned. The assistant who flagged it as personal matter. The transfer he authorized instead of conversation. Efficiency over empathy. Control over connection. He looked at the twins again. "What are their names?" he asked quietly. Natalie answered without hesitation, "Adrian and Elias." He repeated the names softly, as if committing them to memory. "Adrian, Elias." The younger twin stepped forward slightly. "Are you mad at us?" The question pierced through corporate armor. And in that moment, Alexander understood something no quarterly report could teach. Power without responsibility is emptiness dressed in applause. The boardroom waited for him to deflect, to minimize, to issue a statement crafted by legal counsel. Instead, he did something no one expected. He faced the cameras, fully, shoulders squared, voice steady, and he said, "Those boys are mine." The words hit like a thunderclap. Gasps, phones vibrating simultaneously, stock alerts refreshing in real time. But he didn't stop there. He turned slightly toward Natalie. "And so is she." The boardroom froze. Even Natalie's composure cracked for half a second, not weakness but shock. No one had prepared for that sentence. Not the investors, not the board, not the media. He continued, "I made a decision years ago that prioritized my image over my integrity. That was wrong." The chairman whispered harshly, "Stop talking." Alexander ignored him. "These children are not a liability. They are not a scandal. They are my sons." Reporters shouted questions. "Are you stepping down? Was there a cover-up? Are you confirming a relationship with Ms. Reed?" He raised his hand slightly, and astonishingly, the room quieted again. "When you build something worth billions," he said, "you convince yourself, you control outcomes. But some decisions outlive your balance sheet." His gaze shifted back to Natalie. "You deserved acknowledgement, not avoidance." For the first time since entering the room, Natalie looked uncertain, not because she doubted him, but because she hadn't come for romance. She had come for recognition. The board erupted in whispers. "This is reckless. Public admission affects valuation. Family brand investors will react." Alexander turned back to the chairman. "If the board believes fatherhood disqualifies me from leadership," he said calmly, "then perhaps we need new leadership standards." The power dynamic shifted again. Moments ago, Natalie had stood as the vulnerable outsider. Now, Alexander had placed himself beside her, not above, beside. Everyone has felt underestimated, dismissed because of background, assumed incapable because of status, silenced because speaking up felt risky. Natalie had lived that for 6 years. Alexander was experiencing it for the first time. A reporter shouted, "Ms. Reed, are you reconciling?" Natalie answered carefully, "This isn't about romance." Alexander nodded slightly. "She's right." He faced the room again. "This is about responsibility." The younger twin, Elias, slowly let go of Natalie's hand. He walked the few steps toward Alexander, hesitant, watching for rejection. Alexander lowered himself to one knee, an instinctive gesture no strategist would have advised. He met his son at eye level. "I'm not mad at you," he said softly. "I'm sorry." The room shifted emotionally. Because apology from power is rare, Adrian joined his brother. The twins stood in front of him now. 3 versions of the same face, past, present, and future. Alexander stood again. He reached for Natalie's hand. Not possessive, not performative, asking. She hesitated, then allowed it. Flashbulbs exploded across the room. Financial news anchors nearly stumbled over their words. One investor whispered, "He just humanized himself." Another muttered, "Or destroyed himself." But Alexander understood something critical in that moment. Legacy isn't built by avoiding consequences. It's built by owning them. He addressed the press one final time. "Effective immediately, I am placing the merger vote on hold." My legal team will ensure my sons receive full rights and protection, and I will personally address the board regarding structural reforms that prioritize ethics over optics." The chairman looked stunned. "You can't just—" "I can," Alexander replied calmly. "I built this company." Silence followed. Not fearful, respectful. Natalie studied him carefully. "You don't get applause for this," she said quietly. "I'm not looking for applause," he answered. "I'm looking for redemption." Outside, the media frenzy intensified. Inside, something steadier formed. Not a fairy tale, not instant reconciliation, but accountability. And accountability changes everything. The twins looked up at him again, this time not confused, curious, hopeful. Alexander squeezed Natalie's hand once before releasing it respectfully. "We'll talk privately," he said. She nodded. "Because healing isn't public, but responsibility can be." He turned back to the board one last time. "My empire will not be threatened by truth." The chairman swallowed hard, because in one unscripted declaration, Alexander had done what no crisis consultant would recommend. He chose integrity over image, and that decision would echo far beyond stock prices. Stay until the end, because what he does next shocks everyone. The declaration didn't calm the storm. It redirected it. Within minutes, financial networks split their screens in half, one side analyzing market dips, the other replaying Alexander's words on loop. "Those boys are mine. And so is she." Commentators debated strategy. Was it emotional impulse? Calculated reputation recovery? A bold rebrand, from untouchable billionaire to responsible father? But the real tension wasn't on television. It was inside that boardroom. The chairman called an immediate executive recess. Legal teams clustered in corners. PR directors typed aggressively. Phones rang without pause, and Natalie stood still. For 6 years, she had prepared herself for rejection, for denial, for character attacks, for humiliation disguised as corporate defense. She had not prepared for acknowledgement. Alexander approached her again, this time without cameras pressing between them. "I meant what I said," he told her quietly. "You've said a lot of things in your life," she replied evenly. "Only some of them have cost you anything." He didn't argue, because, this time, the cost was real. Investors were already demanding emergency meetings. Board members were calculating risk exposure. Advisors were whispering about temporary leadership transitions. Power has layers: race, class, gender. For years, Natalie had navigated rooms where her presence required explanation. She had been the driver, the assistant, the support role, never the headline, never the priority, until today. Now the same system that once dismissed her was forced to address her directly. One director stepped forward, tone sharpened. "Ms. Reed, do you understand the financial damage this spectacle may cause?" She held his gaze calmly. "Do you understand the emotional damage silence causes?" The room stilled again, because beneath the billion-dollar negotiations sat something much simpler. 2 children had grown up without their father, not because he lacked resources, but because he lacked courage. Have you ever made one decision that followed you for years? Natalie had. Choosing not to beg, choosing not to chase, choosing dignity over desperation. And that decision shaped her sons into confident, observant boys who asked direct questions and expected honest answers. Alexander looked at Adrian and Elias again. He saw more than resemblance now. He saw consequence and possibility. His chief financial officer pulled him aside urgently. "We need to issue a containment statement. Clarify the timeline. Limit liability." Alexander shook his head slightly. "No containment. That's reckless." "No," he corrected. "That's honest." Honesty felt unfamiliar in corporate crisis. It doesn't stabilize stock prices. It stabilizes character. Outside, protesters had begun gathering, some in support of Natalie, others accusing her of opportunism. Social media dissected every frame of her entrance. But inside, something quieter shifted. The twins wandered toward the window, staring down at the city below. "Is all of this yours?" Elias asked Alexander. The question wasn't about buildings. It was about responsibility. Alexander walked over slowly. "It's something I built," he answered. Adrian looked up at him thoughtfully. "Did you build us too?" Natalie's breath caught. Alexander paused. "No," he said honestly. "Your mom did most of that." Natalie glanced at him, surprised again, because accountability doesn't just sound strong. It requires humility. The chairman interrupted sharply. "Alexander, the board demands clarity on succession risk." He turned back, composed. "There is no succession risk. You've exposed the company to reputational damage." Alexander met his gaze calmly. If a company collapses because its CEO acknowledged his children, then it was never stable. Silence. That wasn't the answer they expected. For years, Alexander had been the architect of calculated responses. Today, he was something else. A man choosing long-term legacy over short-term comfort. Everyone has felt invisible at some point. Passed over, overlooked, reduced to a role instead of recognized as a person. Natalie had carried that weight quietly. Now the room felt it. A board member shifted tone, softer. "What exactly are you proposing?" Alexander inhaled slowly. "I'm proposing transparency. A formal acknowledgement of paternity. Immediate trust structures for the boys. And an internal review of how personal matters are handled within executive leadership." The chairman frowned. "You're turning a personal issue into policy reform?" "Yes. Because leadership isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about correcting systems that allow them." Natalie studied him carefully. This wasn't romance. It wasn't reconciliation. It was responsibility stepping into daylight. The younger twin tugged Alexander's sleeve. "Does this mean we can see you again?" The room held its breath. Alexander knelt again. "But this time, not for cameras. For as long as you'll let me," he answered. Natalie's voice cut gently through the moment. "They don't need grand gestures. They need consistency." He nodded. "I know." And he did. Because empires rise quickly. Trust doesn't. Outside, headlines intensified. Billionaire CEO claims secret twins live boardroom bombshell shakes tech giant. But inside, something more meaningful unfolded. Not chaos, not collapse. A recalibration. Alexander turned to Natalie once more. "You didn't come here to destroy me," he said. "No," she replied. "I came here to stop protecting you." That sentence landed heavier than any accusation earlier. For years, she had shielded his reputation quietly, ignored interviews, refused tabloids, protected his brand without receiving his support. That ends today. Power dynamics were shifting permanently. The billionaire was no longer untouchable. The single mother was no longer invisible. The narrative was no longer controlled by press releases. It was controlled by truth. Alexander straightened and addressed the room once more. "This meeting is adjourned." The chairman blinked. "You don't have unilateral authority." "I do," Alexander replied calmly. "And today, I'm using it differently." The executives dispersed slowly, stunned. The media would keep shouting. Investors would demand reassurance. But the most important conversation was no longer public. It was about to happen privately. Natalie gathered the twins gently. "We'll give you time," she said. "Don't," Alexander responded. "Stay." She studied him. "For what?" "For the beginning," he said. "Not a fairy tale, not instant forgiveness, but the start of something earned, because the real story wasn't the scandal. It wasn't the stock drop. It wasn't even the twins revealed. The real story was this. What does a man do after he chooses responsibility in public? Does he follow through in private? Stay with me, because what Alexander does next doesn't just protect his empire. It redefines it. The boardroom emptied, not quietly, but cautiously. Executives filed out in controlled clusters, already drafting damage control strategies. Legal teams prepared statements. Advisors recalculated projections. But Alexander didn't follow them. He held the door open instead. "Conference room B," he told Natalie softly. "No press access." She hesitated for half a second. For 6 years, every private conversation with his office had led to dismissal. Silence disguised as professionalism. Distance disguised as order. 5 minutes, she said firmly. He nodded. 5 minutes was more than she had given him in years. The twins walked between them down the long corridor. Corporate art lined the walls, abstract pieces valued in the millions. Adrian pointed at one canvas. What is that supposed to be? A concept, Alexander answered automatically. Elias squinted. Looks messy. Natalie almost smiled. Messy. That word described this moment better than any financial term. Inside the smaller conference room, the door closed. No cameras, no board members, no investors watching. Just 4 people. Alexander removed his jacket slowly, a subtle signal that this conversation wasn't corporate. Natalie remained standing. We're not here to rebuild a relationship, she clarified immediately. We're here to establish boundaries. Direct, controlled. He respected that. Understood. The twins climbed into leather chairs, too big for their small frames. They swung their legs gently, eyes scanning the unfamiliar room. Alexander sat across from Natalie, not at the head of the table. Position matters. For years, she had sat on the opposite side of power. Now he adjusted it intentionally. Why now? He asked. She didn't soften. Because your legal department tried to discredit me. His expression tightened. They said I was seeking financial leverage, that I was attempting to trap you. He inhaled sharply. Did you authorize that? No, he answered immediately, but he paused. I created the culture that allowed it. That mattered. Ownership without deflection. Natalie folded her hands calmly. You don't get to be surprised by the consequences of systems you built. The words weren't cruel. They were precise. Power dynamics don't only exist in race or class. They live in who gets believed. For years, if Natalie had walked into this building claiming connection to the CEO, she would have been dismissed as opportunistic. Today, DNA results forced acknowledgement. Alexander leaned forward slightly. I never doubted the possibility, he admitted quietly. Then why didn't you call? Because ego is loud. Because pride hates vulnerability. Because disappearing felt easier than explaining. I thought I was protecting my company, he said honestly. You were protecting yourself, she corrected. Silence filled the room. But this time it wasn't dangerous. It was reflective. The twins listened quietly. Children understand more than adults assume. Elias finally spoke. Did you not want us? The question pierced cleanly. Natalie stiffened slightly, not wanting them hurt. Alexander answered immediately. That's not true. He moved his chair closer to them, slowly, intentionally. I didn't know how to handle it, he said carefully. And instead of learning, I avoided it. Adrian studied him with unsettling focus. Mom says avoiding things makes them bigger. Natalie blinked. He gave a small nod. She's right. Have you ever made one decision that followed you for years? Avoidance isn't neutral. It grows. It multiplies. It builds distance that becomes habit. Alexander looked at Natalie again. I don't expect forgiveness. You're right, she said evenly. I expect accountability. That's different, she replied. Yes. The twins slid off their chairs and wandered toward the window again. They pressed their palms against the glass, looking at the skyline below. Can we come here again? Elias asked without turning around. Natalie answered first. That depends. She looked directly at Alexander. Consistency isn't a press conference. It's Tuesday afternoons, school events, doctor appointments. Showing up without cameras. He absorbed every word. I can do that. Can you? She challenged gently, because billionaires manage schedules by assistants and alarms. Fatherhood doesn't fit neatly into calendar blocks. He didn't hesitate this time. Yes. She studied him carefully, looking for performance. She didn't find it. She found uncertainty and effort, the kind that doesn't come naturally to men who've never been denied anything. The younger twin turned suddenly. Do we get your last name? The room went still. Alexander's throat tightened. That's your choice, he said slowly. Natalie's eyes flickered slightly. Surprised again. Choice. He was giving it. Adrian tilted his head. Can we have both? Natalie's voice softened. Yes. Alexander nodded. Yes. In that simple exchange, power shifted permanently. Not forced, not dramatic, but real. Natalie stood. "Our lives are not PR rehabilitation," she stated clearly. "If you're doing this to stabilize markets, stop now." He stood too. Equal height, equal space. "I'm doing this because I should have 6 years ago." That answer held no glamour, only regret and intention. She exhaled slowly. "Good. Because the boys don't need a billionaire. They need a father." The twins turned back toward them. "Does that mean he's coming to our soccer game?" Elias asked. Natalie crossed her arms lightly. "That depends on him." Alexander didn't hesitate. "Text me the time." A small pause. Then Natalie reached into her bag and slid a folded paper across the table. "School schedule. Doctor contact. Emergency numbers, not romance. Structure. Trust is built in small, consistent acts, not grand declarations." He accepted the paper carefully, as if it weighed more than any contract he'd ever signed. Outside the building, headlines continued cycling, but inside that small room, something more powerful was forming, a beginning earned through accountability. Natalie moved toward the door. "We'll leave through the side entrance," she said. "The boys don't need microphones in their faces." He nodded. "I'll arrange security." She paused. "Security protects assets," she said softly. "Protect their childhood." The correction was gentle, but meaningful. He understood. As they walked out together, not as a couple, not yet as a family, Alexander realized something that no boardroom confrontation had forced him to confront. Empires are built through ambition. Legacies are built through responsibility. And this was the first real decision he'd made in years that wasn't about control. It was about commitment. Stay with me. Because what Alexander does in the days that follow will prove whether this moment was emotion or transformation. Outside Laurent Global's headquarters, the world had already chosen sides. Some called Natalie brave. Some called her strategic. Some called Alexander reckless. But very few understood the truth. This wasn't about scandal. It was about a decision made years ago, and the cost of pretending it didn't matter. As Natalie and the twins exited through the private corridor, Alexander remained standing in conference room B, alone. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel powerful. It felt revealing. He looked down at the paper Natalie had handed him. School calendar, emergency contacts, pediatrician, soccer practice schedule. No legal threats, no demands, just structure. 6 years of structure he had not been part of. Have you ever made one decision that followed you for years? One night, one choice to avoid a difficult conversation. One moment where pride felt safer than vulnerability. He walked back into the now empty boardroom. The screens were still on. Financial analysts were still debating his declaration. One commentator said, "This could redefine executive accountability." Another argued, or destabilize investor confidence. But Alexander wasn't thinking about valuation anymore. He was thinking about rain against a windshield 6 years ago. A late-night ride after a charity event. Natalie in the driver's seat, speaking about community programs in Chicago. Her voice steady, her perspective sharp, not impressed by his wealth, not intimidated by his status. That was what drew him in. Not attraction alone, challenge. She didn't treat him like a headline. She treated him like a man, and that scared him. Because power is easier to maintain than intimacy, he had built an empire by calculating risks. But that night, he chose not to calculate. She thought it was just one night. He treated it like one too, until it wasn't. He remembered the voicemail now. Her voice, controlled but vulnerable. "I'm pregnant." He remembered sitting in this very chair, weighing optics, weighing media, weighing investor trust, and choosing distance. Not cruelty, just absence. But absence leaves marks, especially on children. The screen behind him replayed his words again. "Those boys are mine. And so is she." He hadn't planned to say the second half. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't strategic. It was instinct. Because in that moment, something shifted. For years, Natalie had carried the weight alone. And even today, she hadn't asked for marriage. She hadn't asked for money. She had asked for acknowledgement. Everyone has felt invisible at some point. Overlooked at work, dismissed in relationships, reduced to a background role in their own story. Natalie had refused to stay invisible, and that courage forced his. Alexander picked up his phone. 37 missed calls. Board members, investors, advisors. He ignored them all. Instead, he opened his assistant's contact. Clear my schedule every Tuesday afternoon. Permanently. There was a pause on the other end. For how long, sir? For as long as it takes. He hung up. That decision wouldn't trend. It wouldn't make headlines. But it mattered more than any public statement. Meanwhile, across town, Natalie buckled the twins into the back seat of her modest SUV. Adrian looked thoughtful. Mom? He asked quietly. Is he staying? She adjusted the mirror, watching their reflections. That depends on what he does next, she said honestly. Because words are easy when cameras are rolling. Consistency is harder when no one's watching. Elias leaned forward between the seats. He looked scared. Natalie didn't deny it. Sometimes people act brave in public and scared in private, she replied. What matters is which one wins. Back in the boardroom, Alexander stared at the city skyline. He understood something now that no mentor had taught him. Success amplifies who you are. If you are generous, it multiplies generosity. If you are afraid, it multiplies avoidance. He had avoided for 6 years, and that avoidance almost cost him more than reputation. It almost cost him legacy. The chairman re-entered quietly. The board is divided, he said cautiously. Alexander didn't turn around. About my leadership? Yes. And? Some believe you humanized the brand. Others believe you exposed vulnerability. Alexander finally faced him. Vulnerability isn't weakness, he said calmly. Irresponsibility is. The chairman studied him carefully. You're different today. Yes. What changed? Alexander answered without hesitation. I stopped protecting my image. Silence stretched between them. Because the truth was uncomfortable, companies are often built on image, but families are built on presence. Natalie pulled into her driveway hours later. The twins ran inside, energized, replaying the day as if it were an adventure. She lingered in the driver's seat for a moment. She had not planned to walk into that boardroom. She had planned to fight quietly through legal channels. But when the accusation letter arrived, claiming she was attempting to trap him, something inside her refused to shrink. Power dynamics are loud when they favor you. They are suffocating when they don't. For years, she carried the imbalance, silently. Today, she corrected it. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, It's Alexander. She didn't respond immediately. I cleared every Tuesday afternoon, he said. Soccer practice is at 4, right? She glanced at the schedule in her bag. Yes, I'll be there. A pause. No press, she added firmly. No press, he confirmed. Another pause. This one softer. Why did you say, and so is she? She asked. He didn't rush the answer. Because I don't want the boys growing up thinking their mother was disposable. The words landed quietly, not dramatic, not poetic, just real. Natalie leaned back in her seat. For the first time all day, her voice softened slightly. Consistency, she reminded him. I know. She ended the call. Inside the house, the twins were arguing over who would tell their friends first. She smiled faintly. The story wasn't finished. It was just beginning. Back at Laurent Global, Alexander opened his laptop, not to review stock prices, but to draft something else, an internal memo. Subject line, leadership and accountability. Because if one decision could echo for 6 years, then one correction could echo longer. And this is where our story truly begins. What happened 6 years ago? Why did a billionaire choose distance over devotion? What did Natalie sacrifice in silence? And what will it cost Alexander to prove that today wasn't just emotion, but transformation? Stay until the end because what he does next will shock everyone. If you believe one decision can change everything, type one night in the comments. Because sometimes it only takes one night to build an empire, or to challenge one. 6 years earlier, before boardrooms, before twins, before public declarations, There was rain. The Lexington Sky Hotel stood tall over Midtown Manhattan, its rooftop bar glowing like a crown against the dark sky. Inside, low golden lighting reflected against polished marble floors. A jazz trio played near the far wall, soft enough for conversation, loud enough to blur secrets. Natalie Reed wasn't supposed to be there as a guest. She had just completed a late-night corporate driving assignment. One of Laurent Global's executives had insisted on being dropped at the hotel after a private fundraising gala. Her shift should have ended an hour ago, but the rain was heavy, and the city felt slower than usual. She lingered in the lobby longer than necessary, not because she wanted luxury, because she didn't want to go home to silence. Loneliness doesn't always come from being alone. Sometimes it comes from carrying ambition no one else understands. Natalie had moved to New York 3 years earlier from Chicago. She worked 2 jobs, contracted driving for corporate clients and finishing her business certification online at night. She believed in ownership, in self-sufficiency, in never waiting for rescue. But some nights, especially rain-soaked ones, even the strongest people feel the weight of building alone. She glanced toward the elevator leading to the rooftop bar. 5 minutes, she told herself. Just 5. She rode up. The doors opened to warmth, music, and city lights stretching endlessly through glass walls. At the bar sat a man in a charcoal suit, sleeves slightly rolled, tie loosened just enough to suggest exhaustion. Alexander Grant. Though she didn't know that yet. He wasn't surrounded by assistants, wasn't laughing with investors, wasn't commanding a room. He was alone, staring at a half-finished glass of bourbon. Earlier that evening, he had finalized a hostile acquisition that would double his company's valuation. Financial media called it brilliant, strategic, dominant. But success can echo strangely when there's no one you trust to celebrate it with. Alexander had built Laurent Global from a startup into a tech empire before turning 35. He was respected, feared, admired, but rarely known. The bartender approached Natalie. "What can I get you?" She hesitated, scanning the prices. "Sparkling water," she said. Alexander glanced sideways briefly, noticed her simplicity, noticed she wasn't dressed for networking, noticed she wasn't trying to be noticed. He returned to his drink. Until the bartender asked her for ID, she handed it over casually. Alexander's gaze flickered again. Natalie Reed. He didn't register the name, but he registered her composure. When the bartender stepped away, Alexander spoke without turning fully. "Smart choice." She looked at him. "For what?" "Water. Clear decisions." A faint smile touched her lips. "Or maybe I just like bubbles." He allowed himself the smallest hint of amusement. There was something steady about her presence, not impressed, not intimidated, just present. Outside, rain streaked against the glass walls. Inside, 2 strangers occupied the same quiet. The first 10 minutes passed without expectation. Small talk about the storm, the city, late hours. He asked what brought her there. "Work," she answered simply. "And you?" "Work," he echoed. "Different worlds." Same word. She noticed the fatigue in his posture. Not physical exhaustion, but something deeper. "Big day?" she asked. He exhaled lightly. "You could say that. Good big or complicated big?" That question caught him off guard. Most people assumed his days were victories. Very few asked about complexity. "Complicated," he admitted. She nodded, as if she understood. Because she did. Ambition can isolate. You climb, and fewer people can meet you at that height. Alexander had mentors, advisors, investors, but none who saw him without calculating advantage. Natalie had friends, coworkers, but few who shared her hunger to build something larger than circumstance. Loneliness wears different suits, his tailored and expensive, hers practical and resilient. Do you ever feel like people talk to you for what you represent instead of who you are? He asked unexpectedly. She studied him more closely. "Every day," she replied. He looked surprised. "You?" "Yes." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "You don't strike me as someone surrounded by opportunists." She leaned back on the bar stool. "When you're the only black woman in most corporate rooms," she said calmly, "people either underestimate you or try to define you. No bitterness, just fact. That honesty disarmed him. He wasn't used to conversations without filters. "Do you let them?" he asked. "No," she answered without hesitation. Their eyes held longer this time, something unspoken forming. Not attraction first, recognition, two people accustomed to carrying weight without complaint. "Alexander," he said, offering his hand. "Natalie." No last names, no company titles, no resumes, just first names suspended above a city that ran on status. He didn't introduce himself as CEO. She didn't mention Laurent Global. For once, he wanted to be unknown. For once, she wanted to speak without being categorized. "Why are you really here?" she asked softly. He hesitated. Truth or deflection? "Because I don't know who to call when I win," he admitted. The vulnerability surprised even him. Natalie didn't laugh, didn't pity him. She understood. "Winning can be loud," she said, "but it doesn't guarantee connection." He studied her carefully. "What about you?" "I'm building something," she answered, "and sometimes I get tired of building alone." That was it. No dramatic confessions, just two admissions placed gently on the bar between them. The music shifted into a slower melody. The rain intensified. The world beyond the glass blurred, and without realizing it, they leaned closer. The invitation wasn't predatory. It wasn't calculated. It was quiet. "Would you like to see the view from upstairs?" he asked. She considered the question carefully. Measured risk, measured instinct. There was no entourage waiting, no arrogance in his tone, just curiosity. She nodded once. The penthouse suite sat 2 levels above the bar. Private, minimalist, expansive windows overlooking the skyline. Inside, the air felt still, removed from noise. Natalie stepped toward the glass first. "Wow," she whispered softly. Alexander watched her instead of the city. He watched how she absorbed space, how she wasn't overwhelmed by luxury, how she didn't pretend to belong. She simply existed. They talked more about Chicago neighborhoods, about building something from scratch, about fear of plateauing, about responsibility. There was laughter, shared stories, silences that didn't strain. When he touched her hand, it wasn't rushed. When she didn't pull away, it wasn't hesitant. The intimacy that followed wasn't reckless. It was careful, intentional. Two adults choosing closeness in a moment where the world felt distant. No promises exchanged, no future mapped, just connection. Later, lying beside each other, the city lights flickering below, the conversation deepened. "Do you ever worry it will all disappear?" she asked. "All what?" "The success." He stared at the ceiling. "Every day." She turned toward him. "That's exhausting." "Yes," he agreed quietly. She shared her own fear, that I'll build something strong and still be overlooked. "You won't," he said instinctively. She smiled faintly. "You don't know that." He reached for her hand again. For a brief moment, status dissolved. There was no CEO, no driver, no billionaire, no outsider, just Alexander and Natalie, two people acknowledging their fears aloud. And sometimes, vulnerability creates the illusion of permanence. Morning arrived too quickly. Alexander woke first. Old habits, early meetings, structured routine. For a moment, he allowed himself to watch her sleep, peaceful, unaware of the life he carried outside this room. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. 3 missed calls from his chief legal officer. An emergency board call scheduled. The acquisition announcement had triggered regulatory scrutiny. Responsibility rushed back in. He stood quietly, dressed, paused. He could wake her, explain more, ask for her number. But clarity in daylight feels heavier than intimacy at night. He wrote nothing, left no note, only a business card placed neatly on the side table. Alexander Grant, Chief Executive Officer, Laurent Global Technologies. He used Grant publicly to soften his brand image, a strategic choice tied to investor optics. Natalie stirred minutes after he left. She reached across the bed, empty, a flicker of disappointment. She sat up, saw the card, read the name once, twice. Her expression shifted. Alexander Grant, CEO, Laurent Global. The company logo she had seen on corporate vehicles she occasionally drove for. The same corporation whose executive she had dropped off the night before. Her breath slowed. The realization wasn't romantic. It wasn't thrilling. It was clarifying. He hadn't lied. He just hadn't told her. No last name. No context. No disclosure. Betrayal doesn't always come from falsehood. Sometimes it comes from omission. She sat on the edge of the bed, card still in hand, city sunlight replacing rain. He had chosen anonymity. She had chosen honesty. And somewhere between those choices, a future had already begun forming. She didn't know yet that weeks later, a voicemail would change everything. She didn't know yet that silence would follow. But as she slipped the business card into her bag, one thought settled quietly. If he had trusted her with his name, would the next 6 years have unfolded differently? 2 weeks after the night at the Lexington Sky Hotel, Natalie told herself the exhaustion was from overwork. She had picked up extra driving shifts. She had exams approaching for her business certification. Sleep had been inconsistent. Fatigue made sense. Nausea did not. The first wave hit her in the middle of a corporate pickup, outside a financial district building. She gripped the steering wheel, breathing slowly, willing the dizziness to pass. "You're fine," she told herself. Stress. But the second wave came that night while she was brushing her teeth. Sharp, undeniable. She paused, counted days, recounted carefully. Her chest tightened. No, she leaned against the bathroom counter, staring at her reflection. Her mind replayed the penthouse, the rain, the vulnerability, the way he had left quietly at dawn. One night, one decision. Her cycle was late. 3 days, then 5. She didn't panic immediately. She waited, because panic changes nothing. On the 7th day, she drove to a 24-hour pharmacy in Queens after finishing a late shift. She walked in wearing a hoodie, cap pulled low, not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't want to answer questions. She bought one test, then paused, returned to the aisle, bought 2 more. Precision matters. Back in her apartment, the silence felt louder than usual. She placed the first test on the sink, waited. 2 lines. Her heart skipped. No. She opened the second box immediately. 2 lines. Her breathing shifted. Not fast, not dramatic, just heavier. She sat on the edge of the bathtub. "You're calm," she whispered to herself. But calm doesn't mean steady. It means the shock hasn't fully landed yet. She opened the third test, because certainty matters. 2 lines again. 3 confirmations. There was no room for denial. She was pregnant. She closed her eyes, not because she regretted the night, but because she understood the magnitude of what it meant. Alexander Grant, CEO of Laurent Global, the man who had chosen omission over openness, the man whose business card still sat tucked inside her work bag. Her stomach turned again, this time not from nausea, but realization. This wasn't just about her body. It was about power and the imbalance between them. Natalie scheduled a clinic appointment 2 days later. Professional confirmation. Data. She needed clarity before emotion. The waiting room was small but clean. Posters about prenatal care lined the walls. A young couple sat across from her holding hands, whispering excitedly. Natalie sat alone. The nurse called her name gently. Vitals were taken. Routine questions asked. Last menstrual cycle date. Symptoms. Any complications. When the doctor entered, she was warm but direct. "The home tests are usually accurate," she said, scanning Natalie's chart. "But we'll confirm with blood work." Natalie nodded. She preferred facts. An hour later, she sat again in the consultation room, hands folded neatly in her lap. The doctor smiled softly. "You're pregnant." Hearing it spoken aloud shifted something inside her. Not abstract anymore. Real, measured, medically verified. "How far?" Natalie asked calmly. "Approximately 6 weeks." 6 weeks. 6 weeks since the Lexington Sky Hotel. Since the night of rain and honesty. Since he left before sunrise. The doctor continued. "We'll schedule your first ultrasound soon." Natalie nodded again, still composed. But her mind was racing. He doesn't know. Does he deserve to? Will he believe me? And beneath those thoughts, will he think I planned this? Because the world often assumes women with less wealth move with hidden agendas. She left the clinic with paperwork in her hand and silence in her chest. The city moved around her as usual. Traffic lights changed. People rushed to meetings. No one knew her life had shifted permanently. 3 weeks later, she lay back on the ultrasound table. The room lights dimmed slightly. The technician smiled reassuringly. "First ultrasound?" she asked. "Yes," Natalie replied. She kept her tone steady. The cold gel touched her stomach. The screen flickered to life. Static, grainy shapes. Natalie searched the monitor anxiously. The technician's eyebrows lifted slightly. She adjusted the wand, moved it carefully, paused. "Well," she said slowly, "that's interesting." Natalie's stomach tightened. "What?" The technician angled the screen slightly. "There are two." Natalie blinked. "Two?" The technician nodded gently. "You're having twins." The word didn't process immediately. Twins. The room felt smaller, more intense. The technician increased the sound, and then a rapid rhythmic beat filled the room. Strong, steady, and then another, overlapping, distinct. "Two heartbeats," the technician confirmed softly. The sound shattered her composure. Tears welled instantly. Not dramatic sobs, but silent overflow. Two, not one. Two lives forming inside her. Two futures. Two responsibilities. She stared at the screen, watching the small flickers of movement. She wasn't thinking about Alexander in that moment. She was thinking about diapers, daycare, sleep deprivation, doctor bills, and love. An overwhelming, terrifying, powerful love. "Are you okay?" the technician asked gently. Natalie nodded, wiping her face quickly. Yes. But she wasn't okay. She was transformed. She held it together until she reached her car. The moment the door closed, the tears came fully, not from regret, from weight. Twins meant double everything. Double cost, double time, double responsibility. Her driving income barely covered rent and certification payments. She calculated quickly in her mind. Medical expenses, prenatal vitamins, time off work. How would she drive long hours while pregnant? Who would watch two newborns if she returned quickly? The math felt impossible. And then, the second fear surfaced. Custody, power imbalance. Alexander Grant was not just wealthy. He was influential, connected, legally fortified. If he wanted full custody, could he argue stability? Private schools, security, a household staff. Would a court see her modest apartment and assume insufficiency? The thought tightened her chest. Money can shape narratives, and she had seen enough corporate rooms to understand how narratives are shaped. She placed both hands over her stomach. "I will not lose you," she whispered. Not to him, to them, her sons, even before knowing their names. The financial panic was real, but the fear of losing control of her children, that was sharper. Natalie did not call immediately. Calling meant vulnerability without documentation. She chose writing instead. The first letter was brief. "Alexander, we met at the Lexington Sky Hotel 3 weeks ago. I am writing to inform you that I am pregnant." She stopped. Too cold. She crumpled it. The second letter was longer. It explained the clinic confirmation, the ultrasound, the twins. She included a copy of the report, but halfway through, doubt crept in. Would he think this was leverage? Would his legal team intercept it? She rewrote again. Third attempt, more direct, less emotional. "Alexander, you deserve to know the truth. I am carrying twins. Based on dates, they are yours. I am not asking for anything at this time, only acknowledgement." She sealed it, addressed it to Laurent Global Headquarters. She hesitated before mailing it. She drove past the post office twice. Power imbalance echoed in her mind. If he responds aggressively, what then? If he denies it publicly? If he sends lawyers? But silence felt worse than fear. She mailed it. 3 days passed. No response. She waited a week. Still nothing. She checked the tracking number. Delivered. Signed for. No reply. She wrote again. Second letter. More urgent. She included ultrasound images this time. Still silence. By the third month, her body had begun to show. Nausea intensified. Fatigue deepened. And still, silence. No call. No email. No letter. No acknowledgement. She called his office once. The receptionist transferred her to an assistant. The assistant said, "Mr. Grant does not handle personal matters directly. You may submit concerns through legal." Concerns. She almost laughed. 2 heartbeats reduced to concerns. She didn't argue. She hung up. That night, she sat at her small kitchen table under dim lighting. Ultrasound photos spread before her. 3 unopened envelopes from Laurent Global. Corporate newsletters she had once received as a contractor. No personal reply. She pulled out fresh paper. Final attempt. "Alexander, I have written twice. I do not know if these letters reached you directly. I am now 12 weeks pregnant with twins. This is not a demand. It is a fact. I will not chase you, but I will not hide this either. If you choose not to respond, that will be your decision. I will move forward accordingly. Natalie." She folded it carefully, placed the ultrasound images inside, sealed the envelope. The next morning, she stood outside the post office holding it. Rain threatened again, lighter this time. She stared at the mailbox slot. One decision can echo for years. So can silence. She slid the envelope inside. It disappeared. And as she walked away, she made a quiet vow. If he chooses silence now, I will never beg again. Cliffhanger. Because what she doesn't know is that the letter will never reach Alexander directly, and the silence was not as simple as it seemed. 8 months after the Lexington Sky Hotel, after 3 unanswered letters, after months of carrying 2 growing lives without acknowledgement, Natalie's water broke at 2:17 a.m. The apartment was quiet, the city outside muted under a steady sheet of rain. She had been expecting this moment for weeks. Hospital bag packed by the door, documents organized, emergency taxi number saved on speed dial. Still, when the first contraction hit, it stole her breath. Sharp, demanding, real. She leaned against the kitchen counter, breathing slowly the way the prenatal nurse had taught her. In for 4, out for 4. Another contraction. Closer, stronger. She glanced at her phone. No emergency contact listed under father. She had left it blank, not from bitterness, from clarity. She called a rideshare. 10 minutes later, she was in the back seat, gripping the handle as rain streaked across the windows. The driver glanced nervously in the mirror. "Hospital?" he asked. "Yes," she managed. The contractions intensified with each red light. By the time they arrived, her composure had shifted from controlled to strained. A nurse rushed her through intake. "Twins?" The nurse confirmed quickly. "Yes." "Any support person on the way?" Natalie hesitated. "No." The word carried weight. They wheeled her into a delivery room filled with monitors and soft clinical lighting. The heartbeats echoed through speakers, 2 distinct rhythms overlapping. Strong. Alive. The pain grew deeper, more consuming. Hours passed in waves of endurance. She held the bedrail, sweat gathering at her temples. "Stay with me," the doctor encouraged gently. "You're doing well." But labor strips away pride. It leaves only instinct. Between contractions, Natalie thought about the letters, about silence, about how absence can feel louder than rejection. And still, she did not regret them. She did not regret the night, because these 2 heartbeats were worth every unanswered envelope. The first cry pierced the room at 9:42 a.m. Strong, defiant. A nurse lifted the baby gently. "Baby A is here," she announced warmly. Natalie's vision blurred with tears. "Is he okay?" She whispered. "He's perfect." They placed him briefly against her chest, warm, solid, real. Moments later, the second contraction surged, harder, faster, and at 9:48 a.m., another cry joined the first. 2 voices now, distinct, alive. "Baby B is here," the doctor said. Natalie sobbed openly, not from pain, from release. 2 sons. She looked at them, small faces, tiny hands curling instinctively. "Jacob," she whispered to the firstborn. And Owen. She breathed to the second. Jacob and Owen. Names she had chosen alone. Names that carried strength, without extravagance. The nurse wrapped them gently, placing them side by side. Jacob stirred first. Owen blinked slowly, searching light. 2 heartbeats now outside her body. 2 responsibilities no silence could erase. Natalie held them close. "You will never wonder if you were wanted," she whispered fiercely, because regardless of who answered letters, they were chosen. 3 hours later, as Natalie rested weak but steady, a commotion erupted down the maternity hallway. Voices raised. Footsteps hurried. The door swung open without a knock. Alexander Grant stood in the doorway, soaked, hair damp from rain, suit jacket clinging slightly at the shoulders. He looked nothing like the composed CEO from magazine covers. He looked shaken, breathing harder than usual. The nurse stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, you can't just—" He held up a hand, eyes locked on Natalie. "I need a moment." The nurse hesitated, then stepped back carefully. Natalie stared at him. Shock, anger, disbelief. "How did you—" "The third letter," he interrupted quietly. "It never reached me." Her jaw tightened. "Convenient. My assistant flagged something this morning," he continued, voice unsteady. "An internal memo about potential personal exposure. I investigated." Exposure. The word stung. "You only came because it might damage you?" she asked sharply. "No," he answered immediately. "I came because I found out you were in labor." He stepped closer, then stopped. Because the sight stopped him. 2 bassinets beside her bed. 2 small bundled lives. His composure cracked. He approached slowly, not as a CEO, not as a man defending image, as someone confronted with consequence. Natalie didn't soften. She gestured toward the bassinets. "Your sons." The words were steady, not dramatic, but heavy. He looked down. Jacob shifted first, tiny fists moving. Owen's breathing remained calm and rhythmic. Alexander's throat tightened visibly. For months, the possibility had existed abstractly. Now it had weight, faces, features, responsibility. He reached out tentatively, then pulled back slightly. "Can I?" he asked quietly. She studied him for a long second, then nodded once. He lifted Jacob first, awkward, careful, like someone holding something far more valuable than anything he had ever acquired. Jacob's eyes fluttered open briefly. Blue-gray, familiar. Alexander's breath caught. He had built companies, negotiated global deals, commanded rooms full of power. Nothing prepared him for this. He held Owen next, and something shifted visibly in his posture. A realization beyond strategy, beyond fear, beyond pride. His phone vibrated sharply in his pocket. He ignored it. It vibrated again. And again. Natalie watched him closely. He glanced at the screen. Chief Communications Officer. He stepped toward the window briefly and answered in a low voice. "What?" A pause. "Who leaked it?" His jaw tightened. "How?" He looked back at Natalie instinctively. The call continued. "Yes, I'm at the hospital." Another pause. No statements yet. He ended the call slowly. "What is it?" Natalie demanded. He didn't deflect. "PR intercepted internal chatter about my letters. Someone in legal flagged paternity exposure months ago. A journalist has been tipped. A story is coming." Her stomach dropped. Today? Possibly within hours. Silence filled the room. Not tender. Strategic. The world was about to know. Before she had decided how to protect her sons. Before she had chosen whether his name would even be attached. Fear flickered through her expression. Not for herself. For Jacob. For Owen. Alexander saw it. And something hardened in his stance. "Then we get ahead of it," he said. "You think this is a press strategy?" She shot back. "No," he replied firmly. "It's protection." "For who?" she asked sharply. "For them." He looked at the twins, not calculating. Resolute. For the first time, his urgency didn't feel like damage control. It felt like fear of failing again. He stepped closer to her bed. "I should have known," he said quietly. "I should have seen the letters. You didn't, she answered. And I can't change that, he admitted. But I can change what happens now. She watched him carefully. This was the moment. Was he here because of optics? Or because of blood? I want to be involved, he said clearly. Legally, financially, personally. She didn't respond immediately. You don't get to appear when it's convenient, she said. I know. You don't get to disappear again if this becomes uncomfortable. I won't. You don't get to claim them publicly and neglect them privately. I won't, he repeated, voice steadier. The rain outside intensified again, tapping against hospital windows. Jacob stirred softly. Owen let out a small cry. Alexander instinctively leaned closer. Not performative. Protective. I missed the pregnancy, he said quietly. I won't miss their lives. Natalie searched his face. Looking for calculation, she saw something else. Fear, regret, and determination. The phone buzzed again. He silenced it, without checking. Whatever leak is coming, he said. I will not let them frame this as scandal. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Frame it as what? As accountability. The word hung between them, because accountability is expensive. In reputation, in ego, in power. You don't have to decide anything today, he added carefully. But I'm not leaving. Natalie looked down at her sons. Jacob's tiny hand curled. Owen shifted closer in his bassinet. 2 lives who did not choose power dynamics. 2 lives who deserved stability. She met Alexander's gaze again. This is not redemption, she said quietly. It's responsibility. I understand, he replied. Outside the hospital, the first online article went live. Tech CEO linked to secret twins. Source confirms hospital visit. The storm had begun, and this time, he wasn't walking away. The headlines burned out after 2 weeks. Speculation faded into quieter analysis. Financial markets stabilized. PR statements were issued, carefully worded, controlled, strategic. But none of that mattered at 3:12 a.m., when Jacob cried for the 3rd time. Alexander stood in the small living room of Natalie's apartment, staring at a portable crib that looked entirely out of place beside his polished leather briefcase. He had insisted on involvement at the hospital. Natalie had not invited him to move in. He asked, I can't learn fatherhood from a distance, he had said. She didn't agree immediately. You don't get to visit like a guest, she warned. If you're here, you're here. I understand. She gave him the couch, not out of punishment, out of boundaries. The first night felt unfamiliar for both of them. Natalie watched him quietly as he folded his suit jacket over the armrest. No staff, no assistants, no controlled environment, just diapers stacked on the coffee table and bottles warming on the kitchen counter. Are you sure? She asked once more. Yes. It wasn't pride. It was resolve. So Alexander Grant, CEO of Laurent Global, moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Not announced, not photographed, just present. Adjustment came quickly and brutally. The apartment ran on rhythm, not authority. Laundry rotated constantly. Dishes never seemed fully done. Sleep came in fragments. Alexander tried to maintain structure. He set alarms for feeding schedules, created digital trackers for diaper changes. Natalie noticed. You don't need a spreadsheet for everything, she said gently. He paused. I'm used to systems. These are babies, not quarterly reports. He nodded. Adapted. The first time he attempted to change Owen's diaper alone, it ended with a mess across his cufflinks. Natalie laughed, softly, involuntarily. He looked down at himself, then laughed too. Humility arrived, in small humiliations. He burned formula once, mixed bottles unevenly, rocked Jacob too stiffly, until Natalie corrected his posture. Relax your shoulders, she said. They feel tension. He adjusted. Slowly, he learned which cry meant hunger, which meant discomfort, which meant exhaustion. At Laurent Global, people anticipated his needs before he spoke. Here, 2 newborns dictated his. It didn't weaken him. It humanized him. Still, he stepped outside frequently. Phone pressed to his ear, voice lowered. Natalie noticed. She didn't comment yet, but she noticed. By the third week, exhaustion became a shared language. The nights blurred. 2:07 a.m., 3:46 a.m., 5:12 a.m. Jacob cried louder. Owen stirred softer. Natalie would rise automatically. Until Alexander began waking first. "I've got him," he'd whisper. One night, Natalie watched from the doorway as he held Jacob against his chest, pacing gently. He wasn't checking emails, wasn't glancing at his phone, just murmuring quietly. "You're stronger than you look," he told his son softly. The baby settled gradually. Alexander didn't move for several minutes, afraid to disturb him. Natalie felt something loosen inside her. Not forgiveness, recognition. He wasn't performing, he was learning. Another night, both boys cried simultaneously. Natalie picked up Owen. Alexander took Jacob. They stood facing each other in the dim light. 4 heartbeats in one small room. "Is this what partnership feels like?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer immediately. "It's what responsibility feels like," she replied. There was no romance yet, but something steady was forming. Shared fatigue can soften distance. Still, his phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. He glanced at it, silenced it, stepped into the hallway. Natalie's eyes followed him. The return wasn't dramatic. No grand declarations, no impulsive gestures. It was quiet. One evening, after finally settling the twins, they sat on opposite ends of the couch. Television on low, neither watching. Alexander looked different without the suit. Less guarded. "You're good with them," Natalie said softly. "I'm trying. That matters." Silence lingered. Comfortable this time. He reached for her hand slowly. Not claiming, just offering. She didn't pull away. The touch held memory. Rain. The penthouse. Vulnerability. But this time, it carried weight. History. Consequences. He brushed his thumb gently over her knuckles. "I'm sorry for the silence," he said. She inhaled carefully. "I built strength because of it," she replied. "But I shouldn't have had to." He nodded. "I know." The intimacy that followed weeks later was careful. Earned. No illusion of fantasy. No forgetting the past. Just 2 adults reconnecting after surviving something larger than attraction. But even afterward, as she rested against him, his phone vibrated again. He stepped away to answer. Whispered conversation. Low. Urgent. Natalie stared at the ceiling. Something felt unfinished. Jacob smiled first. It happened during a feeding. Alexander froze when he saw it. "Did you see that?" he asked, voice almost boyish. Natalie smiled. "Yes. It's intentional?" "Probably gas," she teased. He laughed quietly. Owen began tracking his voice more consistently, turning toward it, recognizing it. Attachment was forming, not symbolic. Real. One afternoon, Alexander lay on the floor between the bassinets, talking softly about buildings and ideas he wanted to create. "They'll build their own," Natalie said. "I hope so. You can't design their lives." "I won't," he answered. He meant it. The bond deepened through repetition. Feedings, bath time, burping cloths over his shoulder. But each time his phone rang, he left the room, stepped onto the balcony, voice lowered. Natalie's trust, slowly rebuilding, paused each time. Because secrecy feels familiar. And she had lived through omission before. One night, after a long stretch of silence between calls, Natalie finally asked, "What aren't you telling me?" He didn't deflect. "Legal fallout," he admitted. "Shareholder pressure. A board review." She held his gaze. "That's not all." He hesitated. "Just slightly. There are ongoing investigations about internal leaks," he added. "Related to us?" "Yes. Why didn't you say that?" "I didn't want to add stress." Her jaw tightened. "Deciding what I can handle feels familiar." He winced. "I'm trying to protect you." Protection without transparency feels like control. The words settled heavily. He stepped closer. "You're right. Trust rebuilding isn't grand. It's incremental." He began leaving his phone on the table, answering calls in front of her when possible, updating her voluntarily. But one night, a call came through labeled board emergency. He stepped outside again, longer this time, voice sharper. When he returned, his expression was unreadable. "What?" she asked. Nothing urgent, he said, but something in his eyes suggested otherwise. Trust was forming, but doubt had not disappeared, and doubt waits patiently. It started with warmth. Jacob felt slightly hotter than usual during a late-night feeding. Natalie paused, touched his forehead again. Alexander, she said quietly. He stepped closer. They both knew. Newborn fever isn't minor. The thermometer confirmed it. 101.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Natalie's chest tightened instantly. We're going, she said. No debate. They dressed quickly. Rain returned as they rushed to the car. Inside the emergency room, fluorescent lighting felt harsh and sterile. Jacob whimpered weakly. Owen remained at home with a trusted neighbor. Every second felt stretched. Doctors moved quickly once they heard newborn fever. Tests, swabs, blood work. Natalie stood rigid beside the hospital bed. Alexander's hand hovered near Jacob's tiny foot. Helplessness hit him harder than any boardroom threat. What if it's serious? Natalie whispered. He didn't offer empty reassurance. We'll handle it, he said. But his voice carried strain. Doctors mentioned possible infection. Observation required. Overnight monitoring. Natalie's composure cracked. She turned away briefly, tears slipping free. Alexander stepped behind her, held her shoulders gently. I should have noticed sooner, she said. You did notice, he replied firmly. You caught it early. Guilt finds mothers quickly. Fear finds fathers just as sharply. Jacob stirred weakly. A nurse adjusted his IV line. Alexander looked smaller in that moment than he ever had publicly. Because money cannot negotiate fever, influence cannot demand recovery. Hours passed. Monitors beeped steadily. Natalie sat beside the crib, fingers laced with Jacob's. Alexander stood opposite her, watching both. At 3:18 a.m., as exhaustion blurred edges, the words slipped out of him. I love you. Not to the room, to her. She looked up slowly. What? I love you, he repeated. No performance, no pressure, just truth born from fear. She studied his face. He didn't look like a billionaire in that moment. He looked like a man terrified of loss. This isn't about gratitude, he added quietly. It's not about the boys alone. I love you. Her breath caught, because she had guarded herself carefully. Even while letting him in, she didn't respond immediately. Not because she didn't feel something, but because love without trust fractures easily. Jacob's monitor beeped steadily. Alive, present. She squeezed Alexander's hand gently. We'll talk about that when he's okay, she whispered. But she didn't let go. Morning light filtered through hospital blinds. The pediatrician entered with calmer energy. Temperature is stabilizing, she said. Likely a viral spike. We'll continue monitoring, but he's responding well. Relief hit them both, visibly. Natalie exhaled deeply. Alexander closed his eyes briefly. When the doctor left, he turned to her again. I'm not leaving, he said. She waited. Not the apartment, not them, not you. Board pressure or not. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What board pressure? He exhaled slowly. There's a vote being discussed. About my leadership. She absorbed that. You didn't tell me. I didn't want you to feel responsible. I'm not fragile. I know. He stepped closer. If I lose the company tomorrow, I will still choose this. He gestured gently toward Jacob. Toward her, that's permanent. Silence settled again. But this time it felt anchored, not fragile. Natalie nodded once, then prove it. He didn't hesitate. I will. Jacob stirred softly between them. Alive, breathing, and in that quiet hospital room. Before the next wave of chaos could rise, they stood closer than ever before. Not because crisis forced them, but because fear clarified what pride once blurred. It started with a headline that spread faster than any official statement. Billionaire trapped by single mom. Inside the secret twin scandal, Natalie saw it first, not Alexander. She was standing in the kitchen, rocking Owen gently while scrolling through her phone. The article was published by a digital gossip outlet known for aggressive narratives. The language wasn't subtle. It painted her as strategic, calculated, ambitious in the worst possible way. Anonymous sources claimed she had targeted Alexander. claimed she had waited strategically, claimed the hospital scene had been timed for leverage. Natalie's jaw tightened, not because strangers believed it, because millions would. Across town, Laurent Global's communications team was already drafting counterstatements. Alexander received the alert during a board pre-to-meeting call. One director read the headline aloud. Silence followed. Another voice said coldly, "This damages brand stability." Alexander's grip on the phone tightened. "She is not a brand risk," he replied evenly. "She is public risk," the director corrected. The framing was clear. Natalie was being positioned as threat, not mother, not partner. Threat. The narrative had shifted from accountability to entrapment. And narratives shape markets. By afternoon, photographers gathered outside Natalie's apartment building. They waited by the sidewalk. They lingered near the entrance. One even attempted to follow her rideshare when she took Owen to a pediatric follow-up. Flashbulbs erupted as she stepped out once. "Did you plan this pregnancy? Are you suing for assets? Was the relationship consensual?" The questions weren't investigative. They were accusatory. Alexander arrived mid-chaos one evening, security detail trailing discreetly behind. He saw the cameras before he saw her, and something in him hardened. He stepped between Natalie and the photographers instinctively. "Back up," he said sharply. "Mr. Grant, is she blackmailing you?" The words sliced through the air. Natalie flinched. Barely. He turned toward the cameras. "Do not question the integrity of the mother of my children." His tone wasn't explosive. It was final, but the cameras didn't retreat. They adjusted, zoomed in closer, because conflict sells. That night, Natalie sat quietly in the bedroom, while Jacob slept against her chest. Alexander paced in the living room, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, increase security. No, I will not release a distancing statement." His voice was calm, but strained. Natalie listened through the thin wall. And fear whispered quietly, "What if protecting them becomes too expensive?" 2 days later, a financial blog published another rumor. Sources indicate paternity remains unverified. The claim was false. DNA testing had already been completed at the hospital after the initial exposure. But rumor spreads faster than correction. The blog suggested the possibility of doubt, implied uncertainty, invited speculation. The board seized on it immediately. "If there's ambiguity," one member said during an emergency meeting, "we must demand formal testing before further reputational damage." Alexander's voice remained steady. "There is no ambiguity." Then release documentation publicly. He paused. The thought of publishing private DNA results for media consumption felt invasive, dehumanizing. "These are children," he replied. "These are shareholders," another director countered. Power tension tightened again. Alexander ended the meeting abruptly. Later that night, he found Natalie sitting at the kitchen table. "They're questioning paternity publicly," she said quietly. "I know. Will you test again?" His eyes flashed. "No." "Why?" "Because I will not allow my sons to become debate material." She studied him carefully. And for the first time since the headlines started, she saw anger directed outward, not toward her. Laurent Global's board convened privately 2 days later. No press, no leaks, just 12 individuals discussing risk. "Your leadership has become a distraction," one senior member stated bluntly. "My leadership produced record profits last quarter," Alexander responded. "Stability matters more than profit." The implication was clear. Personal scandal, even reframed as responsibility, was dangerous. "We propose a temporary step back," another suggested. "Interim CEO until public sentiment cools." Alexander leaned back slowly. "And if I refuse, then a vote will be initiated." This wasn't just reputation anymore. It was power, legacy, control over the company he built from nothing. That evening, he returned to the apartment quieter than usual. Natalie noticed immediately. "They're pressuring you," she said. "Yes. For what?" "To choose." Her chest tightened. "Choose what? Company or distance?" The word landed heavily. Distance, not legally framed yet, but implied. Natalie's voice lowered. You can't resent us for consequences. I don't, he replied instantly. But she heard the hesitation behind exhaustion. 3 days later, Alexander's legal counsel arrived at his corporate office with a draft proposal. It was framed carefully: optics management, reputation firewall, temporary co-parenting agreement with separate residences, translation, create visible distance, protect shareholder confidence. The document outlined separate public appearances, controlled statements, defined financial responsibilities without relational implication. Alexander read it slowly. Each line felt sterile, transactional. They're suggesting we stage separation, he said flatly. It's strategic, the lawyer replied. It's dishonest. It's protective. For who? Alexander asked sharply. The lawyer did not answer directly. That evening, Alexander sat across from Natalie at the kitchen table. He placed the document between them. They want us to separate publicly, he said. Her face remained unreadable. Do you? No. Silence lingered. But, she asked quietly, there's a vote next week. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the paper. Are we leverage? She asked. He didn't respond immediately. That silence hurt more than accusation, because doubt had entered the room, and doubt is difficult to evict. The night before the board vote, Natalie stood alone in the nursery. Jacob and Owen slept side by side, peaceful, unaware of negotiations being conducted around their existence. Alexander stood in the doorway. You're thinking, he said. Yes, say it. She turned to face him. I can survive without your company, she said quietly. But I can't survive watching you protected over them. He stepped closer. I won't. You already protected it once, she reminded him. The words weren't cruel, they were factual. He inhaled deeply. I thought silence was protection then. And now? Now I know better. She searched his face, looking for certainty, looking for sacrifice, because love without sacrifice feels temporary. If you step back, she said softly, I will not beg you to stay. He nodded once. I know. Outside, the world debated. Inside, the choice waited. And the vote loomed. The morning of the board vote, an investigative article surfaced unexpectedly. Grant family legacy, unresolved scandals from the past. Alexander's father had once faced allegations of corporate manipulation decades earlier. Quietly settled, never legally proven, but never forgotten. The article suggested history repeating, implied moral instability, connected paternal absence to generational patterns. Alexander read it in stunned silence. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordinated. The timing aligned too precisely with the board vote. Natalie saw the article an hour later. Your father? She asked. Yes. Why now? Because pressure invites attack. But this felt deeper than gossip. It felt targeted. An internal compliance officer contacted Alexander privately. There's indication someone inside leaked archived files about your father, she said. Inside Laurent Global? Yes. Motive became clearer. Destabilize leadership. Force board action. Shift control. Alexander realized the twin story might not have originated externally. It may have been weaponized internally. And then another thought formed. If someone could leak decades-old archives, they could intercept personal correspondence too. That afternoon, Alexander requested archived communications from 6 years prior, including mailroom logs, assistant routing records. One detail stood out. 3 certified letters addressed to him personally, flagged as personal, non-urgent, marked as handled. He never remembered seeing them. He requested the assistant from that year, now reassigned internally, to be brought in. She entered his office pale. You intercepted letters addressed to me? He asked calmly. Her silence answered first. They were marked personal, she said carefully. During acquisition season, you were under intense scrutiny. I thought, you thought what? That distractions would weaken negotiation posture. The room felt still. You decided pregnancy was a distraction? She looked down. I never opened them. But you prevented them from reaching me. Yes. 3 letters. Certified. Delivered. Blocked. His silence 6 years ago was engineered. Alexander drove straight to Natalie's apartment. No call. No preparation. He entered breathless. They intercepted the letters, he said immediately. She froze. What? My assistant rerouted them. Marked them non-urgent. I never saw them. Her expression shifted rapidly. Shock, anger, relief, pain, all three? She asked. Yes. She sat down slowly. Then you weren't ignoring me? No. But you still didn't call after that night. He absorbed that. That part is on me, he admitted. Silence hadn't been pure abandonment, but it hadn't been innocence either. It had been manipulation layered over pride, complex, painful, human. Internal security confirmed further findings. The same executive assistant had recently shared archived family material with an external contact, an independent media consultant with ties to Alexander's father's former investigator. The pattern aligned. The twin story had not emerged organically. It had been cultivated, not by Natalie, not by journalists alone, but by someone protecting corporate focus, protecting performance. By controlling narrative, Natalie processed quietly. For 6 years, she said slowly, I believed you chose silence. He knelt in front of her. I chose avoidance, but I did not choose abandonment. That distinction mattered, not perfectly, but meaningfully. The board vote took place hours later. Alexander walked in with clarity. When asked about instability, he responded calmly. My leadership was not compromised by scandal. It was compromised by internal gatekeeping that silenced personal truth. He revealed the interception, did not name the assistant publicly, but established the record. The board vote split, not unanimous, but decisive enough. He remained CEO, not because scandal disappeared, but because manipulation had been exposed. That night he returned home, not triumphant, steady. Natalie stood by the window. So it wasn't abandonment, she said quietly. No, but it wasn't courage either. He nodded. I'm learning that now. She stepped closer. Trust had been fractured by silence. Now silence had context. And context changes everything. But it doesn't erase consequence. It deepens understanding. And understanding opens the door to something stronger than forgiveness. Choice. The boardroom looked identical to the day Natalie first walked in with the twins. Glass walls, polished oak table, city skyline stretching behind it. But this time, she entered beside Alexander, not as surprise, as presence. 12 board members sat in controlled silence. Legal counsel positioned along the wall. The atmosphere was not explosive. It was calculated. The chairwoman opened the meeting crisply. Mr. Grant, we appreciate your transparency regarding the internal misconduct. However, investor volatility remains. Translation, your personal life still threatens stability. Alexander remained standing. Natalie sat beside him, not hidden, not introduced as liability. The chairwoman continued, a leadership confidence vote is on today's agenda. Natalie's pulse remained steady. She had survived childbirth alone. She had survived public accusation. A boardroom did not intimidate her. Alexander spoke clearly. My personal accountability has strengthened my leadership, not weakened it. A director interjected. With respect, the optics continue to distract. Alexander's voice sharpened slightly. My sons are not optics. Silence rippled across the table. One senior member leaned forward. Then perhaps you should prioritize family privately and allow the company to move forward without controversy. The implication was unmistakable. Distance yourself publicly. Protect brand value. The room felt familiar. 6 years ago, silence had been framed as strategy. Today, distance was being framed as responsibility. Alexander placed both palms on the table. If my father's legacy is being weaponized, he began evenly, and my children are being reduced to risk variables, then we have a deeper issue than optics. A director responded coolly, this is about fiduciary duty. And mine includes integrity, Alexander replied. He inhaled once, steady. If this board believes fatherhood compromises my ability to lead, then I will submit my resignation effective immediately. The room shifted visibly. Murmurs broke. Legal counsel leaned toward the chairwoman urgently. Resignation would destabilize stock instantly. Competitors would seize the opportunity. Markets would react harshly. The threat was not emotional. It was strategic. Because resignation removes leverage from the board and places it back in the hands of the founder. You would walk away? The chairwoman asked carefully. I would walk away from a structure that punishes responsibility, he answered. Natalie watched him closely. Not for drama. For conviction. This wasn't about romance. It was about whether he would choose power or principle when forced. The chairwoman glanced at Natalie for the first time directly. Ms. Reed, she said, controlled but firm. This matter concerns executive governance. Natalie met her gaze. With respect, this matter concerns my sons. No tremor in her voice. The board exchanged looks. One director spoke sharply. Public involvement has already complicated matters. Natalie stood, not defensive, grounded. You labeled me a complication before you knew me, she said calmly. Then you labeled my children a distraction. Now you're labeling accountability as instability. The room quieted. Power shifts don't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they arrive through clarity. You're worried about shareholder perception, she continued. But perception follows behavior. If you punish a man for standing beside his family, you don't stabilize your company. You expose your values. No raised voice, no spectacle, just truth delivered evenly. Alexander did not interrupt her, did not shield her. He let her speak. Because respect includes space, Natalie stepped slightly forward. I didn't ask for this spotlight, she said. I asked for acknowledgement. When letters were intercepted, silence wasn't strategy, it was interference. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Internal misconduct had already embarrassed them. But today, she continued, you're deciding whether responsibility is weakness. The chairwoman folded her hands. What are you proposing, Miss Reed? I'm proposing you measure leadership by character, not convenience. A younger director nodded subtly. An older member leaned back, contemplative. Alexander watched the board's reaction shift from resistance to reconsideration. Not unanimous, but divided. Power rarely collapses instantly. It fractures first. One director finally spoke carefully. Perhaps our concern isn't his fatherhood, but risk management. Then manage it without erasing humanity, Natalie replied. That was the moment. The room stopped viewing her as external variable and began recognizing her as stakeholder. Alexander turned toward the board. I will not restructure my life to comfort perception, he said clearly. I will not distance myself publicly from the mother of my children to protect stock fluctuation. He paused deliberately. If that is a condition of leadership, I decline the position. Silence fell heavy, not chaotic, serious. The chairwoman exchanged glances with two senior members. After a brief closed-door sidebar, she returned. The board acknowledges the internal mishandling of personal correspondence and the external narrative distortion. We propose a formal statement affirming executive accountability and condemning speculative reporting. No distancing clause, no staged separation. Alexander nodded once. Accepted. He didn't look triumphant. He looked steady. Natalie exhaled slowly, not because victory felt dramatic, but because clarity had been chosen. Publicly, later that afternoon, a press conference was held outside Laurent Global headquarters. Alexander stood at the podium, Natalie beside him. No gap, no staged tension. He spoke calmly. My sons are not scandal. Their mother is not opportunistic. She is resilient. He paused, and I stand beside her. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. The narrative shifted again, not because gossip disappeared, but because he did not retreat. If a man protects you publicly, that's love. Agree? There were no violins, no staged rooftop dinners, no diamond advertisements. The proposal happened in the apartment. Jacob and Owen, asleep in the nursery, dishes drying on the counter, laundry folded, but not yet put away. Real life. Alexander stood near the window, hands slightly tense. I don't want redemption, he said quietly. I want partnership. Natalie looked at him carefully. That's different, she replied. Yes. He reached into his pocket, not dramatically, simply, A small velvet box. Her breath didn't catch. She didn't gasp. She studied him. "I love you," he said steadily. "Not because of crisis, not because of obligation, because you challenge me, because you strengthen me, because you stand on your own." He opened the box. A simple ring. Elegant, not excessive. "I want to build something intentional with you." Natalie didn't reach for the ring. She walked toward the kitchen counter, rested her palms on it. "You don't propose after chaos," she said calmly. "I'm not proposing because of chaos. You are proposing after proving something." "Yes." She turned back toward him, and proving something isn't the same as sustaining it. He absorbed that. "I know." She approached slowly. "I will not become a symbol," she said. "I will not be folded into your brand. You won't. I will not give up autonomy." "You shouldn't." Silence settled. Not rejection. Evaluation. Love without structure collapses under pressure. She understood that. So did he now. "If we do this," she continued, "the prenuptial agreement is transparent. Of course. No hidden clauses. No leverage triggers. Agreed. I have independent counsel. You should. And it protects both of us equally." "Yes." He didn't flinch, didn't negotiate, because partnership without fairness is imbalance, and she would not repeat imbalance. "Second," she said, voice steady, "custody remains structured, regardless of marital status." He nodded. "They are ours, not assets. Never. If this fails," she continued calmly, "they do not become bargaining tools. They won't." He stepped closer. "You think I'd fight you for control? I think power changes people." He inhaled slowly. "Then build safeguards," he said. "I'll sign them. Trust is not blind. It is built with agreements." "There's more," she said. He smiled faintly. "I expected that." "I don't want to be funded," she clarified. "I want to lead." He waited. "The foundation you proposed last month, the community initiative for single mothers, it isn't your charity, it's ours." "Agreed. I want equal leadership, equal decision-making authority. You'll have it. Not symbolic, operational." He nodded firmly. "Operational." She studied him carefully, looking for hesitation. She found none. Finally she stepped closer. "You are not rescuing me," she said softly. "I know. You are choosing me." "Yes. And I am choosing you." She extended her hand, not because she needed saving, because she wanted partnership. He slid the ring onto her finger. No dramatic applause, no spectacle, just quiet agreement. Jacob stirred faintly in the nursery. Owen shifted beside him. Life continued, not as fairy tale, as decision, as structure, as respect. And that is stronger than fantasy. The idea did not begin with ambition. It began with exhaustion. Jacob and Owen were 9 months old when Natalie opened her laptop at 1:14 a.m. Both boys were finally asleep. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt earned. She stared at a blank screen, not as Alexander's fiancée, not as the woman from headlines, as herself. For months, journalists had tried to define her story. Gold digger, strategist, victim, distraction. None of those felt accurate. So she decided to write her own version. She titled the blog, Mother Interrupted. The first post was not dramatic. It was honest. She wrote about the moment she saw 2 lines on 3 tests, about mailing letters that were never answered, about holding 2 newborns while headlines accused her of manipulation. She did not mention insider leaks. She did not expose internal sabotage. She wrote about fear, about strength built without applause, about what it feels like to love children. The world debates as scandal. She ended the post with a simple line. Motherhood doesn't pause because power is uncomfortable. She clicked publish without telling Alexander. The next morning, she woke to thousands of shares. By afternoon, tens of thousands. Women commented, "I've felt invisible too. Thank you for telling it without glamour. This made me cry." Her honesty wasn't curated. It wasn't brand managed. It was direct. And it spread. Within weeks, Mother Interrupted became more than a blog. It became a conversation. Natalie wrote about postpartum fear, about co-parenting with someone powerful, about refusing to shrink when public narratives tried to define her. She addressed the gossip headline directly in one post. She didn't attack. She reframed. Entrapment implies strategy, she wrote. Motherhood implies responsibility. Know the difference. The post went viral, not because it was aggressive, because it was composed. Morning shows invited her to speak. Podcasts requested interviews. She accepted selectively. No exploitative platforms, no drama circuits. She spoke about systems that silence women, the fear of custody imbalance, the cost of pride. She never portrayed herself as rescued. She never portrayed Alexander as villain or savior. She described growth. That nuance made her credible. Alexander watched her interviews quietly from the living room one evening. "You don't need me in that room," he said softly. She smiled. "I never did." It wasn't dismissal. It was fact. The blog turned into something larger. Natalie noticed a pattern in messages from readers: single mothers overwhelmed by legal confusion, women afraid to speak against powerful partners, mothers struggling to return to work after birth. She didn't want applause. She wanted infrastructure. So she launched a community initiative, Tiny Steps, not a charity photo op, a resource network, legal literacy workshops, financial planning sessions, emergency childcare partnerships, mental health referrals. She announced it through her blog first. No press release from Laurent Global, no board involvement. Just, if you're walking alone, you don't have to stay alone. Volunteers signed up within days. Local businesses partnered quietly. Tiny Steps hosted its first workshop in a modest community center in Queens. Natalie stood in front of 20 women with no stage lights, no corporate banner, just printed handouts and folding chairs. "This is not about survival," she told them. "It's about structure." Her voice didn't tremble, because this time, she wasn't fighting for recognition. She was building something on her terms. The Grant Foundation had existed long before Natalie entered Alexander's life. It funded tech scholarships and infrastructure projects, but it had never focused on maternal advocacy. Alexander approached her one evening with a proposal. "The foundation can fund Tiny Steps nationally," he said carefully, "under your leadership." She did not respond immediately. "What does that look like?" she asked. "You control operations," he said. "Full executive authority over the program, independent board, transparent funding." She held his gaze. "No symbolic oversight. Operational control," he repeated. "And no branding that positions this as corporate redemption. It won't." The partnership launched 6 months later. Press coverage focused on impact, not scandal. Natalie stood at the podium during the announcement. Alexander remained seated in the front row, not speaking, not directing, listening. When reporters asked how it felt to be associated with the CEO's foundation, she responded clearly, "I'm not associated. I'm leading." The correction was subtle, but deliberate. With Tiny Steps expanding to 3 cities within a year, Natalie's presence shifted. She was no longer introduced as Alexander Grant's partner. She was introduced as founder of Tiny Steps, author of Mother Interrupted, advocate for maternal equity. Power looked different on her, less loud, more intentional. At a national leadership summit, she spoke about accountability and autonomy. "Power is not dominance," she said. "It's responsibility applied consistently." The audience rose in applause. Alexander watched from backstage that evening, not possessive, proud. After the event, a journalist asked him, "How does it feel to have such a powerful woman beside you?" He smiled slightly. "I don't have her beside me," he said. "I stand beside her." The distinction mattered. 2 years after the blog's launch, a major magazine requested a cover feature. The editor suggested a headline, "From Scandal to Success." Natalie declined. Instead, she proposed, "Redefining Responsibility." They agreed. The feature focused on her work, her strategy, her resilience. It mentioned Alexander, briefly, but not as her identity. When the issue was published, she placed a copy on the kitchen counter casually. Jacob and Owen, now toddlers, were stacking blocks in the living room. Alexander glanced at the cover. "You didn't need a spotlight," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "I needed a platform." And she had built it. Not because she was chosen, because she chose herself. Jacob and Owen turned 3 in the backyard of their modest but expanded home in Queens. Not a mansion, not a spectacle, just grass, balloons, folding tables, and neighbors. Tiny Steps volunteers brought cupcakes. Grant Foundation staff attended quietly. No paparazzi, no reporters. The press cycle had moved on. The board had stabilized. The house felt alive with laughter. Jacob chased Bubbles across the lawn. Owen attempted to feed cake to the family dog. Natalie stood near the grill, smiling freely. Alexander adjusted a paper crown on Jacob's head. No speech prepared, no branding opportunity, just family. The boys ran wildly across the yard, legs unsteady but fearless. "Catch me," Jacob shouted. Owen stumbled, then got back up determined. Alexander jogged behind them, laughing openly. Natalie watched the scene carefully. This wasn't image repair. It was routine joy. A neighbor approached quietly. "You've built something beautiful," she said to Natalie. She looked at her sons. "We built it," she corrected gently. Because partnership, when earned, is shared. No flashing cameras, no urgent calls. Alexander's phone rested on the patio table untouched. The board had shifted focus to innovation initiatives. Investor confidence was stable. Crisis had faded into memory, not erased, integrated. Natalie poured lemonade into plastic cups. The life she once feared losing custody of now ran freely across grass. Stability did not come from wealth alone. It came from decisions made under pressure. As the sun lowered, the boys finally collapsed into their small chairs, faces sticky with frosting. Alexander walked toward Natalie. He didn't perform affection. He stood beside her. "I didn't want heirs," he said quietly. "I wanted home." She turned toward him. "You gave me that." The sentence held weight, because once he had chosen image. Now he chose presence. Natalie studied him carefully. "You came back for your sons," she said softly. He nodded. She continued, "You stayed for me." Not accusation, recognition. He reached for her hand. No grand kiss, no cinematic crescendo. Just fingers intertwined as children laughed nearby. Later that evening, as guests filtered out and the boys slept deeply upstairs, Natalie leaned against the kitchen counter. "You ever think about expanding the chaos?" she asked lightly. He raised an eyebrow. "Expanding?" She smiled faintly. "Hypothetically." He laughed quietly. "Let's master bedtime first. No promises, no timeline, just possibility, hope grounded in reality. Love is not dramatic gestures. It is consistency. One mistake does not define a lifetime. Alexander's silence cost him 6 years, but growth defined what followed. Love without responsibility is immaturity. Responsibility without vulnerability is isolation. Protection is love in action. When he stood beside Natalie publicly, he didn't save her. He respected her. Sometimes the right person returns differently. Not perfect. Not heroic. Changed. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from one decision, type second chance. Like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Heartstring Tales for stories that remind you love isn't found in fantasy. It's built in responsibility.